Hey friends, welcome to the Determined Truth Podcast, where we equip the church to be the church. Well, hey everyone, we are continuing on in part 2 of our conversation with Danny Hall last week. And as you could see, Danny looks different right now. Well, we've all aged because it's been, it's not yesterday anymore. But Danny, you moved. So you have boxes all around you and you're in a new location, new time zone even. You're welcome to the West Coast, bro.
Yeah, welcome back. I'm back.
Yeah, welcome back. What's interesting is today in real time, as the listener is listening or the YouTube viewers watching, and thank you for watching on YouTube, please subscribe to the channel if you want to see updates on these and all the videos we do. But today is March the 9th, but in real time on March the 9th, because today isn't March the 9th, today is February the 19th. Is that what today is?
2019.
2019. We're going back in time.
Yeah, we're recording 6 years early. 7 years
yes, early. We're prophets. But you guys are actually in India. This isn't Back to the Future stuff.
There you go.
Yeah, you're even though you're in California and Arizona, you're in India. So you guys are technically on March the 9th, as people are listening, you're in India ministering to our friends at the various Bible studies that Determined Truth has. So everyone can be praying for you guys, specific prayers that you guys would like to have now that you're in the future, and you could go back in the DeLorean and tell us.
No COVID.
No COVID. Yeah, because that happened before.
And we always manage to arrange a relatively insane travel schedule.
Yeah.
And so just endurance and perseverance.
Yeah, we arrive at 1 a.m. India time on Monday. We leave on Saturday U.S. time. And then we will have a full day of teaching on Monday. So the day you're listening to this, we'll have a full day of teaching that day after traveling for 36 or 40 hours.
Oh my gosh!
But we're young; we can handle that.
Yeah,
you're still a young man, baby.
Danny, don't be too enthusiastic there, Danny.
Yeah,
you didn't sell. We're gonna do another take. We're gonna edit that. So Danny, but we're young; we can handle that. Take two.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. That's much better.
Youth is relative. And just so you know how crazy the time schedule is, if you guys land at 1 a.m. on what day?
Monday the 9th.
So that's right, Monday the 9th. So that means that is 12:30 p.m. on Sunday, because it's or is it no, or would it be
yes, you're right, 12:30 in the afternoon on Sunday back here.
Yeah. The time it's what 12 and a half hours time difference, or what?
Yeah, 12 and a half. 12 and a half hours.
Yeah, so that's a wild
from
Arizona. Okay.
Well, anyways, we'll figure it
out. By that time, no, actually, I think that's the time change for us. So now we skip an hour back. It's all jacked up. Time zones, man. Hey, it's a result of the fall. So let's get into today's topic, and we've been continuing. We're continuing a conversation about church health and what that looks like. Last week, we framed the conversation regarding what should a healthy pastor look like. We would look at that for healthy, church leaders. Today, we're going to get into the specific question of what does church hurt look like? And that's a legit term, so I don't want to say I don't like that term, but that's a term that we oftentimes use to encapsulate anytime there's a problem or someone has an issue with a church. And it's not always the appropriate term, because church hurt is a thing, but that's not the same as church abuse or church trauma. And so there's a spectrum here. And so we're gonna, part 2 of our conversation is going to spend time parsing that out and working through that a little bit. But what we really want to do is we're framing this in terms of how could we unpack our own understanding of the experiences that we've had in the church, if it's been a negative experience. And so, Danny, one of the things that you bring to the conversation is, outside of serving, for years and decades, possibly centuries, but as a pastor and missionary. Thank you. I mean, that was a softball right there, but
ministry was so much easier before the fall.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. What was it like in the garden when there was just no problems? So
did Adam and Eve have belly buttons?
The questions we all want to know. But you've actually had formal training as a consultant for churches and organizations regarding the health of those organizations, and you've dealt with this topic firsthand. And you have training as a spiritual director, which is, and I'll let you explain more of what these things are. But this goes along with the question of, hey, if there weren't problems, people like you, a spiritual director or a consultant, you would be out of a job. But the fact that you have been trained in this means there's a problem that needs to be addressed. And so I'd love to start the conversation with your background and the things that you've seen, and then maybe we could parse out what do we mean by hurt and trauma and abuse and those sorts of things, and maybe how those types of things even led you into your own journey. So I don't know, give the people a little bit of a background on your experience in that area.
I think I've always been sensitive in some ways to how structures hurt or help people. I've always questioned those from early in my ministry experience. When I was a missionary in Europe and living in Vienna, Austria, the latter part of that time, I was a pastor of an international church, and not to get lost in the weeds on the backstory, I ended up having a lot of other missionaries who worked in Eastern Europe but were based in Vienna as part of my church family. And I became a pastor to missionaries there and got into the weeds with lots of different kinds of missionary organizations, and began to observe the different ways organizations treated their personnel and how they handled problems. I began counseling that. And so as a pastor, I got sort of immersed immediately into some ways that Christian structures can be harmful to people and helpful, both, the tension of that. When I came back to the States and was pastoring, I mentioned last time that I experienced one time, I have a clear memory of a time when I felt like I participated in something that was spiritually abusive to another person, to a person in our church. And that was a wake-up call to me, that it's very easy for us in institutional leadership to get into the mode of protecting either a doctrinal system, a ministry system, a reputation. We have in our minds all these things that we need to protect, and boundaries that we've created, the lanes for people to be in. And it's very easy in those processes to forget that the people in front of us are actual human beings. And so we tend to very easily in ministry leadership see people as, we don't say this consciously, but subconsciously, I think we can very easily begin to see people as instruments to further the agenda we feel called for, rather than they're just human beings, people we're called to serve and minister. And that distinction that was a wake-up call for me probably 25 years ago when I had that, which led me on a journey, I think, to try to understand better how people operate. I've always been fascinated by that, how of human interaction and how those different systems form it. So that's my background. It led me to, I was deeply helped by someone who was consulting with our church staff on our organizational health. I got into that field for a while and actually did church consulting. And also with some businesses, and working with businesses on developing their own leadership team structures and stuff. And then eventually, because of the impact of my own journey spiritually, I got trained as a spiritual director, because my heart is to help pastors particularly and leaders to be spiritually healthy people. Last time we talked about what does a healthy pastor look like. Well, most of us need help with that. And that was kind of the impetus for me to kind of explore more fully the whole area of spiritual formation, spiritual direction, which basically is a role where you come alongside an individual and try to help them notice the workings of God in their own life, to begin to pay attention to how God is trying to grow them and form them. And there's a whole bunch of subparts to that. But for me, the whole journey has been about, people are being hurt, and I'm hurting people, and I'm hurting myself. I have hurt. I tend to sometimes be hurtful to others. As a spiritual leader, how do I become the healthiest version of myself that I can, in order that we can build healthy churches? We can stop the hurt and the pain. And of course, when you get into that, you start confronting it. So I don't know if that's helpful. That's a little bit of my own journey to get that, to walk alongside people. And I've heard stories, you guys have been through them too. We all have stories of people being hurt by churches. We've all ourselves have had some amount of hurt on that.
I think it's sorry, Dan. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I think it's important to understand the fact that we can't deny that there's a spiritual battle going on there, right?
100%.
And that the forces of evil in the heavenly realms. That I remember, when I was going through a particular episode of kind of abuse in a situation, I try to focus as much as it's hard when you're being abused, right? It's just so hard. But try to focus on the fact that, okay, this is the work of the devil. This is the devil trying to bring division into the church, to bring division in, and to defeat the work of the church. And it's not that person versus me. It's and so much. And so therefore I have to be careful, because we can't give the devil a foothold in my own life. And in this situation, I just think it's important that we recognize that there is an enemy who doesn't want the kingdom of God to succeed, whether it's in our life or in the larger church. And I think that's an important factor to bear in mind.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. I think, let me push back one part about that.
Sure.
The danger is when we frame our own lack of, when we are perpetrators, we can easily, and people push back against that. We have to be careful that we don't easily assign their challenge to us as those people being the voices of the demonic forces opposed to me.
Correct.
It's very easy to manipulate. I believe 100% you're right, Rob. But one of the tactics that then Satan, devil, builds on top of that is to get us to use that language as a weapon against people who might have a real reason to question what we're doing.
Sure. Well, there's a little off ramp then that I'd like to, as I'm hearing you guys talk, just a question I have. So if we're looking at this conversation as a freeway, it's okay. Good. Let's stop real quick. One of the things, if we're talking about, you as a spiritual director, helping people unpack their own issues, I know that you've worked with both church leaders, and I'm assuming that you've just pastored congregants, a non-church leader.
Yes.
Okay. I think one of the things that anyone is going to come up against is no one's going to assume that they're the problem. Right? Like, how often do we actually say, like, oh, I'm the instigator in this. I'm the one who's actually causing the hurt or abusing someone else. For you had that moment where you're like, oh my gosh, I did something that was hurtful or abusive. But that's probably the rarity. Most people are going to go on the defense and assume the other person is a problem. Right. Have you seen things that I don't know, that could be something that could help someone evaluate if they are actually the problem and not assume that they're the victim in everything?
Yeah, a few years, maybe it's best to frame it this way. A few years ago, I came across a concept. It's not original with me, but I ran with it and developed my own thinking around it. And that's this: when we all react to somebody says something, does something, we react to it. Our reactions are almost always driven by our emotions. But our emotions don't kick in when we see the act or hear with this. So whatever the stimuli is, our emotions kick in, we react. But the step before that is when we see or hear something, we tell ourselves a story about what we saw. And then that story drives our emotions, and the emotions drive our reactions. And when I first heard that concept, it just was mind-blowing to me. And I've been unpacking that and thinking that through. So where I would go with this is we have to understand that we all are constantly telling ourselves stories about what we see. And when
you say stories, you don't mean a false, like a fiction. You just mean it's a narrative in order to put the situation together. Is that what you mean by story?
Here's a silly concrete example. I go to the grocery store.
Great.
My wife sends me to the grocery store and says, go buy this. I go there and there's 5 different choices. So I go, you know what? I don't know which one she wants. I'm going to give her a quick call. I call her. She doesn't answer the phone.
What? That happens to you too?
I don't go without a picture on my phone of the product, by the way, because I know by now that I'm in trouble with whatever. I'll bring home 4 items and I'll be the wrong 4.
The moment that happens, I tell myself a story. The story could be, I can't believe she's doing this again. Or is she in trouble? Is she hurt?
Right.
Is she... so we start to tell ourselves a story about the event.
Right.
And the way I frame it is this: the stories that we tell ourselves we construct these stories. They're forged by the complex environments that have shaped us and the internal brokenness that constrains us. So you combine those things. We've been culturally and historically, externally, had gone through these experiences, plus our own brokenness, and we have lenses then that we start interpreting the realities that we see. And back to what you're saying, Vinnie, in order for us to begin to understand our role, we have to become more and more self-aware of what drives the stories we tell about ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And this is true at the church level as well as the
Mm-hmm.
personal level. Churches tell stories. They have
Mhm.
a collective cultural lenses about themselves that the leadership puts together and begins to tell them, we're this kind of church, we do this. And so when we see something, we run it through that lens. The problem with this is those lenses, because they're formed through these both external and internal forces, they're not clear lenses. They're highly biased lenses.
Mm.
And so it leads to self-justification or misinterpretation, or even sometimes self-doubt and self-harm. I'm no good. Whatever has formed us, these things drive us. And so part of what I've tried to do in my own life and try to do with people that I talk with is to help them explore and understand, why is it that you see this way?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And now I'm not a counselor, and sometimes I get in situations and I'll say, you know what, you need to let me refer you to a competent counselor whom I think can help you unpack some of these more difficult things. So I don't want to pretend that I am a counselor or psychologist or
Mm-hmm.
whatever that can help people with some of these severe problems with that. But it's true for all of us that we have this bent toward telling the stories that come out of us. So when we get in these church situations, they're either in their worst forms, they're either incredibly self-defensive,
Right.
Mm-hmm.
or they're incredibly self-deprecating, depending on where we are emotionally in our health. Sometimes they're very self-destructive stories. Sometimes they're very self-defensive stories.
Mm.
And so I think when we talk about church hurt, which you're going to unpack for us, I know Vinnie here in a few minutes a little bit more clearly, I think that what happens is the leaders of a church, and then the church culture begins to tell itself stories. And then we're back to, rather, in the situation that I was in, I felt like we were defending a theological biblical interpretation without seeing the person in front of us.
Mm.
And our limiting our ability to help that person or are they within the bounds of what we thought were a biblical lane, and imposing that rather sternly in that situation. We paid no attention whatsoever to the depth of the hurt of the person in front of us.
Mm.
And we're not hearing that person.
Mm.
So we were defending that. The story we were telling ourselves is we have to defend the truth.
Mm-hmm.
Not we have to serve we tell ourselves we are serving this person by defending the truth. And I came to believe that in that situation, we were not doing that. We were not serving that person by
Let me maybe I don't want to go off topic too much here. So Vinny, bring me back if this is where we want to go. But
Come
maybe
back.
thank you. But all right, sorry.
No.
So could it be an example, Danny, for example, like one of the things I try to tell my students is, listen to the other side. Listen to their story.
100%,
You
yeah.
don't know their story and you don't know where they're coming from. So why are they acting the way that they're acting? So for example, maybe a softer illustration would be, we see a homeless person. I've been told my whole life, that's the way I was raised, that they made bad choices. They're in the situation there because of their bad choices. So if I just give them money, they're just going to buy drugs. And therefore I take the commandment that says, care for the poor and give without asking anything in return. And I say, it doesn't apply here because actually I'm just helping him in his own sin and his own, and so, but I don't really know his story. Oh, you're a veteran and you came home with PTSD, and all of a sudden, we don't know what happened. We don't know what their story is. Or on the flip side, it would be, oh, they asked Danny to preach and not me. Oh, I must not have been good enough last time. I thought I did a good sermon, but they didn't tell me if I did a good job or not. I don't think I'm a very good preacher, so I guess that must be the case. I'm not a very good preacher because clearly they asked Danny to preach and they didn't ask me. That self-deprecating part of it as well. Are those examples or illustrations, or am I off base, or do I need counseling? And Rob, we'll talk after the show's over.
Well, Rob, you do need. They're not mutually exclusive there.
True,
so,
true.
Yes,
True.
exactly.
That was
Both things can be true. Yes, I think those are examples of what I'm talking about. And and Vinny, you asked at the beginning of this, how do we help people unpack that? I've honestly come to believe that we can't do that alone.
Mm.
There's just no way. And part of the loss of a sense of community in our churches, like real community, part of it some of what we're dealing with in terms of church hurt and abuse and unhealthy churches is because we've lost this. We don't see the community of church as a kingdom family. We don't see that mutuality that we saw, but that's necessary to. But we have to remember, in the New Testament church, there were all kinds of problems just like ours.
Sure.
They're constantly dealing with the same thing we're talking about in their own cultural historical forms. But I do think that we need to get we need to be in the kinds of relationships, whether they're formal like counseling or direction, or they're just friendships, or disciple, mentor, mentee, whatever the relationship. We need people in our lives that can help us unpack this stuff.
So it sounds like you're saying there's an aspect of self-awareness that we need, but also it's not just self-awareness. You're going to develop self-awareness also through community. So it's like a both and.
Yeah.
I don't think people ever become fully self-aware alone.
Sure.
So I think even our own self-awareness is a product of our community. Hearing one of the things I told one of my younger staff guys once, who was struggling with some things, I finally looked at him and said, the mark of maturity as a leader is understanding how other people experience you. And he was incredibly unaware of how other people were experiencing. And he would say, well, I meant this, I'm trying to do this. Yes, but you're not paying attention to how and what you do things and how you say things, how other people are experiencing that. And part of your own growth is to grow in that awareness. And we can't do that without the help of other people. We have, in healthy marriages, for instance, in a healthy marriage, our spouse is able to say, when you do this, blah, 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 this is what people see. This is how I feel. But so in healthy friendships and relationships, whatever the nature of those relationships, they can be in all kinds of different relationships, but we need people that have access to us, that allow us to see more clearly. And I think it's incredibly crucial for leaders in churches. To have
well, so this is interesting, because as you say that, I'm thinking of the spectrum of a healthy leader versus an unhealthy leader and what might be a red flag. So you're sitting down with a leader and you say, hey, brother, this is something I'm seeing in you, and this is how other people are responding to you. The healthy, everyone's going to have an issue. No one's perfect, right? So everyone's going to bring baggage and deficiencies into their role. The healthy leader is going to want to be curious about this and say, like they might be a little defensive, but they're ultimately going to want to have the posture of saying, okay, how do I change that? How can I work through this? What are some things that I could do? Thank you for making me aware of it. Whatever language they use, they're going to be on that side of the equation. If you have someone on the other side of the equation that says, well, that's just the way I am, or I'm not responsible for the way they interpret things, or if they're being defensive, that's a huge red flag, right?
Yeah, 100%. I think, and what happens again, back to part of the stories that leaders in that second category begin to tell themselves is, what do they tell themselves? Is that this ministry is dependent on me. It's here because of the gifts that I have, the vision I have. We start to tell ourselves that story, and if we don't allow anybody to challenge that story, or we dismiss anyone who challenges that story, then I think we're on a path of insulation that will almost always end up in either catastrophic hurt, or at least some serious hurt along the way, to ourselves, to the organization, to the people that you're serving. There's going to be a debris field behind that kind of attitude, almost for certain.
One thing I was putting my own language to what you were saying in terms of the stories we tell ourselves. And I don't know why I'm attributing this to Patrick Lencioni, but because it's been like 15 years since I've read 5 Dysfunctions of a Team and Death by Meaning. I forget which book this might have been in, but I think it was him who has the idea that says, anytime, rather than him using story language, we tell ourselves stories. I think he says that when there's a gap in the information, like, why didn't my wife tell me this, or why didn't, or why is this person saying this? When there's a gap there, we could fill that gap either with trust or suspicion. Is that Lencioni language, if you guys remember that?
Yes, it sounds like it. Okay. It does.
And is that similar to like that's the stories we tell ourselves? It's just like when we
Yes.
have that gap of information, we could either fill that gap. We're going to fill it with something. So do we fill it with suspicion about the other person, or do we fill it with trust and give the benefit of the doubt?
Well, one of Vinciana's ground principles is that the foundational principle of a healthy organization, a leadership team for our healthy team is trust. That is the foundation, and trust is built on transparency and honesty. And without that, then you have what he would often call the meeting outside the meeting. Where as soon as the meeting's over, person X and person Y go out somewhere and go, "Can you believe we blah blah blah?" You know. And so there's no trust to actually be honest in the meeting. So you have the meeting outside the meeting, and that starts the whole seeds of discord all over the place. So I would, yes, trust is foundational, but trust is based on transparency and honesty and honest feedback. So we're back to however language you put on it. We're talking about living in in spaces where we allow people to have access to who we are, and accept and expect them to be honest with us about the kinds of things that are helpful. If I'm diverging here, bring me back on track. We had one of Lencioni's one of his consultants come in and do work with our church staff when I was in Pleasanton. And we went through the whole process. We had a staff of about 12. We had 12 people in a 2-day offsite being led through a lot of these principles. And there comes a point at the end of day one where they do this exercise in honest feedback, where everybody takes a piece of paper and writes down one thing they appreciate about each of the other people, and one thing they wish that other person would deal with. And then we read them out loud. And they say, and because I was the lead pastor at the time, they go, "We're going to start with Danny. So we're going to go around the room, and everyone's going to read the one statement that they said that they appreciate about Danny." And they all read that to me out loud. And said, "Now,
and you're feeling pretty good at that point."
Well, and is it, they're all going to read the one thing, that they wish Danny would work on. And there's like 10 or 11 people reading these out, and about 7 or 8 out of the 10, 11 said the exact same thing.
Interesting.
It's like, oh, maybe I should hear this.
So Danny, what was that?
Yeah, share that with us.
No, you don't have to.
For transparency's sake.
For me, it was indecisiveness.
Oh, you didn't have to answer that, by the way.
But that was the thing that I realized. I love ambiguity and stuff like that. But my own love of ambiguity was creating insecurity and lack of direct. So they were like, "We need you to do this for us." And I'm hearing it. So 8 or 9 of them say the same thing, and I'm going, okay, they're all experiencing me as a leader in this negative way. So rather than be defensive about that, I go, okay, I need to work on that and grow as a leader in that area. So that's what I'm saying. Self-awareness is formed in community best. And I think, and one of the principles I learned in that, and took these principles in the consulting, is if the person on a lower level like says, "We really want to do this," if the person at the top of the food chain has to be committed to this, or it won't work. So, and in my case, I had to be the person at the top of our food. I was the lead pastor. I had to be the one who set the tone for this. I had to hear the criticism. I had to internalize it. I had to take steps to deal with it, or the whole thing would have collapsed. There would have been no credibility of what we're doing. So I think in healthy, we're talking about church hurt here. I think, again, we have to these things tend to happen in places where there is insulation and isolation at the leadership level. And therefore, and we use all these defense mechanisms to protect themselves, their quote, the ministry and those kinds of things. And so, anyway, I think that's so crucial.
Let me make two things, if I can, Danny. One, there's a sense where isolation is kind of part of the pastor's role. I mean, there's a level of transparency that you really can't have as the pastor and leader, for lots of reasons. But then, what would you say to someone who's going, okay, I know, as Danny's talking right now, I know of a situation where the leader in my church community, whatever it might be, is unaware of these things. How would you tell them, whether it's an individual or several individuals, to go about helping that pastor realize that situation in a way that's actually helpful to everyone?
It might depend on the prior relationship that individual has with the pastor.
Sure. Yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
But let's say in general, if unless there's a real fear factor, like there's going to be, if I do this, I'm pretty sure I'm going to get, that hit back with hard.
Right.
If there's an opportunity, I would suggest start with going and have a conversation with that person and say, I want to understand better this X. And so you said this or you did this, and I'm trying to understand. When I see this, I don't want to misinterpret it. I mean, you can go in and say, I'd want to understand better, but it might depend completely on the nature of the relationship with the person, the level of it. If it's a really large church and you're an anonymous person in the pew, it's going to be harder. Or if you
probably won't get into the office to begin with. Let's be honest, right?
That kind of thing. So it would really depend on the nature. It might have to be case by case. I do think there's a place for a conversation, and you can explore it. And probably a conversation will let you know, is this person open or not open to going further with dealing with this?
Yeah. Okay.
And
I might add too that depending on the situation, you might need to have a witness or someone with you.
Yes.
Whether that's just someone, depending especially upon the situation there.
I would agree with that. I think
they feel threatened or whatever, and all of a sudden now it comes back on you. You need that support base as well. So yeah.
Yes.
All right. If we could maybe just kind of wrap up this conversation with that, which is a little bit of we'll probably do a deeper dive on this later, but just as we're touching on this, because Rob, you had mentioned, bringing in a witness, that could be wise. It could also get weird because now all of a sudden when you bring someone else in, it's like, oh, this is a thing now. When is it a wisdom situation to do that? And we don't have to do a full unpacking of Matthew 18, but oftentimes that is the passage that's used in terms of, reconciling issues or when someone has sinned against you. When it comes to engaging with a church leader who has done something, is that following the same model of, well, did you go to the person individually first, or do you bring someone there? Is this technically sin? Does Matthew 18 always apply to a church leadership situation? And I know I'm asking kind of a broad question. We'll probably unpack it in more depth later because I think it demands that. But just as it relates to this conversation, what do you guys think on that topic?
I tend to look at things like Matthew 18 as a guideline, not a law. And I do think some of it may depend on the nature of the relationship and the seriousness of the offense. Because there are some situations where going in and having a conversation with that individual one-on-one is absolutely the right thing to do.
Exactly. Sure.
There could be other times where, as Rob said, it would be better to have a third party in on this, just to make sure that there's some sort of accountability for how the conversation goes, so it can't be manipulated outside the conversation as it's reported to others. I don't know if you can lay it down a flat law on it, Vinnie. I tend, like I said, look at Matthew 18 as guideline, not law. This is an appropriate way, a framework to think about how to deal with these things. Not my reason I hesitate to call it a law is because I also seen people accuse leaders defending their position by using Matthew 18 and saying they didn't follow the steps right. Therefore, this is not a legitimate thing. And so I want to be careful I don't want to create that thing. Our people are so worried about did I cross all the T's and dot all the I's on the process that the actual issue gets obscured. So I think it's a guideline, not a hard, fast law. I think it was case by case. There's got to be wisdom. And sometimes we have to get the advice of someone before we enter into it. But that's a tough one because you don't want to be gossiping and talking.
Because that often, and these are the terms that become weaponized now, where it's like, you didn't do Matthew 18, or you didn't come to me individually, or you're gossiping because you're talking to someone else when you're seeking counsel, and these become weaponized by church leadership.
And I think it's these things are they're very complex. And the tendency for them to be abused in all different directions is pretty high, because these are high stakes issues. So I think be wise, be careful. I don't know if there's one size fits all, depending on the nature of the offense, the nature of the relationship, the structures that are around it. I don't know. I would probably have to sit down with an individual and coach them through how to do it best. But the default should be, I want honest resolution. I'm deeply concerned. I would like to talk to this person about it. I just want to wisely figure out the best way to go about it.
Yeah. Rob, did you have thoughts on that before we wrap up?
Yeah.
I know you have thoughts, but
yeah. Matthew 18 is not talking about when there's power dynamics involved. If a brother commits a sin against you, is two equals essentially in society, socially equal. It has nothing to do with what happens when there's someone in power doing something to someone without power. Now everything is different. Secondly, when you talk about someone in power or a church leader, don't take an accusation against a leader unless there's two people involved, right? Unless there's two people have that accusation. So that tells you that I got an issue here, but I have to go to somebody else. As Danny said, sometimes it's wisdom. Sometimes I'm getting understanding, discernment. How do I approach this? Why the bad? That's not gossip. That's just wisdom.
And you're referring to 1 Timothy 5 at that point, right?
Yeah, exactly. And even if it's a marriage situation, sometimes, hey, I need to confront my wife. Danny, can you? How should I talk? And it would be, oh, well, don't bring it up. That's just wisdom, getting the counsel and support there. But it has nothing to do with when there's power dynamics involved, especially if you think of a corporate place situation, like a workplace or whatever. You don't confront the boss directly, because that can really come back with serious repercussions. And let's be honest, churches often work that way with this corporate ladder. And if there's an abusive pastor, abusive leader, it's probably not wisest. You might go through the hierarchy and finding an elder, somebody on the board, or a pastor, but you have to go through that chain there. But Matthew 18 does not apply to the unequal situations where there's power dynamics involved.
I think you're right about that, Rob.
At Determined Truth, we do more than just this podcast. One of our major projects is training pastors in India each week. We even help start a Bible college there. But we could only do this because of the generous support from partners like you. Seriously, that means you. If you consider supporting us with a fully tax-deductible donation with anything from $5 a month or more, we can continue to equip the church to be the church. To give, go to determinedtruth.com and click on the Give tab, or find the link in today's show notes. Thanks. Let's move into part 2 of the conversation, which is the topic of what is church hurt and what is church abuse, and how those aren't the same thing. There's actually a spectrum here. Here's the way I want to start this conversation off. A week or so ago, I had a friend, a Facebook friend, who is a pastor, and I've never been in this guy's church, but I've seen him. I know him from high school, and I've seen him on social media through the years. And there's nothing in me that questions his integrity as a pastor or his love for his congregation. I've seen that, there's no red flags for me with this guy. And he posted this video, and I think he means well by it, but it doesn't sit right with me. And I want to get your guys' reaction, because I think this starts off the conversation and what we're going to go to. So I'm going to bring it up. Hopefully this will work. And it's about a minute long. If you're listening on the podcast, there's nothing you need to see about it. It's just the audio that will capture it. So here, let's try this and see if it works.
They got hurt, they got offended. This terminology of church hurt, it's actually problematic. It's very divisive language, because it's to suggest the thing that hurts you is the church, the body of Christ. The church didn't hurt you, Susan hurt you. If I was to ask you, write down a list of all of the names of the actual people that offended you, what you'll find is probably not the church hurt you, but like 3 people offended you. Stop attributing the sin of Susan to the bride of Christ. Church hurt is like saying, food made me fat. No, food did not make you fat. Food is a category. Bad food made you fat. McDonald's made you fat. But you actually need good food to survive. Don't demonize the category of the church because it's necessary in your life. Without the church, your Christianity dies. Your spirituality dies. Don't demonize the church as a category when there are bad churches, but the church, the bride of Christ, is not the problem. And if Jesus Christ loves the church that much that he died for it, you ought to as well.
All right. So there's
Danny, you go first.
There's a lot of stuff here.
Man.
I would even say, like, my response when I saw it, there's truth in here.
Yeah.
Yes.
But just like
Yeah.
there's ingredients that you can make chocolate chip cookies with and shepherd's pie, you don't always necessarily combine all those ingredients. It doesn't make the best thing.
Yeah.
But my question is, as someone who is coming out of a season of having experience what I would call church abuse and trauma, I see that and I'm like, man, there is a lot in there that's just not right. I would want to know your guys' reactions. You're seeing this for the first time.
My reaction is, to me, like you said, there's truth in there. Of course, the body of Christ is greater than any one bad church, etc. But it sounds to me like it's a way of deflecting responsibility from how a church culture could be in a given church. It's deflecting how the responsibility and accountability for how a specific church could be hurting people, and the culture of a church could be promoting hurt. So she kind of ruins her own cause at the end when she says, well, there are good churches and bad churches. And I want to say, well, yes, that's the point. And all
churches denied that though in her statement. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So it's like, which
it's a self-defeating statement is what
it is. And so it kind of undermines her whole argument, because in fact, there are good churches who sometimes act badly, and they're just churches who are pretty bad all around. So yeah, it sounds like she's somebody probably criticized their church about something, and she's trying to deflect accountability. That's my reaction to it.
Yeah, Rob's ready to go on this one.
Well, no, man, we can go for a long time.
That's what I'm saying.
I actually almost wish I had seen it earlier, so I actually have more time to process my thoughts.
Yeah, that was my gut reaction, was that.
Yeah, I almost wish. Yeah. First off, it's like, well, the Nazis didn't kill 6 million Jews, Hitler did. Or the Nazis didn't kill my father, that officer did, right? Or Pepsi Cola didn't give me cancer, that person who sold the Coke to me did. Okay. Even though that person who sold the Coke to me was actually a representative.
Wait. I have to stop you there, Rob. As a native Atlantan, you cannot you cannot defame Coke like in Pepsi.
All right. We'll cut that out.
I can go with you on Pepsi, but not on the
I'm a Pepsi guy, so
yeah. McDonald's didn't get me hurt because she said McDonald's didn't McDonald's made you fat. No, actually, the person who sold me the burger did. Okay, so it's like, all right. When you first said, when you were introducing the clip, you said, "I've never been in this person's church," and I thought, okay, well, interesting, because what we're doing there, we have several definitions at store. One is the church. And Vinnie, you are a part of that person's church, because we're all members of the church.
But I'm not part of his congregation.
Exactly. Yeah. So we have to, just to be clear. And so the next problem I think I have with it is, Danny's totally right. She's trying to deflect the problem. When the church does good, she's going to want to take credit for it. But when it does bad, the church didn't do that. That bad pastor did. But it's a failure to understand what the church is. The church is you, me, Danny, and everyone else who's actually followers of Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
So the church did sponsor the Inquisitions. The church did sponsor the Crusades. The church did do some abusing kids. Now, I think sometimes it's valid to say, yeah, not that I'm going to do this in a particular situation. I'm not sure that person actually is a member of the church, but that's for God to decide. But the church is responsible for what individual A, B, and C do, just like a corporation is. I mean, I got an email last summer saying, hey, just so you know, if you speak up on on social media, whether you say that you work for Grand Canyon University or not, you do, and you're representing Grand Canyon University, and therefore it could be grounds for dismissal if we don't agree with you making that political statement. That's the reality, that we are representing Christ, and we're his body, and we need to own that. So those are my raw thoughts.
Yeah. So let's go through a little bit of.
I'm sorry. At the same time, whenever I teach on this, I also note The church is the one that started most hospitals. The church is the one that feeds more people around the world. The church is the one that started more schools. The church is the one that cares. So we are also doing those things too. Sure, we're often the bad things that we do are often makes the news and the media and gets the attention. But we also need to realize the church, not just Mother Teresa, is doing these wonderful things too.
Yeah.
Amen. There's a balance to that. Oh, sorry.
Totally agree. And our goal isn't to bash the church. Like we said, deconstruction is not a bad thing to try to figure these things out. One of the most loving things you can do is self-critique. What we're not doing, though, is we're not abandoning the church. We are saying, hey, let's reconstruct, not just deconstruct, but let's reconstruct in a way that has a view of the bride of Christ in a beautiful way. Kind of going back to the beginning of the pastorals series that we did when we had Jace Broadhurst on, when he was one saying, it's the bride of Christ. It's beautiful. He loves her. I love that optimistic view that he, was reminding us of that as we front loaded this entire conversation.
Yeah, if I can interject, Vinnie, someone made a comment a while back. Oh, Rob, you hate the church. I'm like, the church is the bride of Christ. It's the body of Jesus. The love for the church means that we're going to critique it. If you love someone, you're not going to allow them to continue being abusive. You're not going to allow them to continue to do something hurtful to themselves or to others. So love actually demands that we understand that it's appropriate to critique, but the church is the body of Christ through which God does the work of his kingdom. If you don't love the church, we don't love Christ. Whatever you did to the least of these brothers of mine, you did to me. Yeah. So it's because of a love for Christ, I think, that's motivating even this conversation here.
Yeah, and even just to put a word picture to it, in my bachelor's degree, I was studying chemical dependency to become an addiction studies counselor. That was actually going to be my goal. And one of the things you learn about in abusive systems is the concept of homeostasis. We oftentimes know about this from science class, but the same concept exists in family systems. And so homeostasis is when everything is working the way it's working. And so you have a family of four. Dad's the alcoholic, mom is the codependent who's making sure that dad is functioning and getting off to work on time and that sort of thing. She's the image a curer of everything for family and friends and all that. The oldest son is taking on responsibilities of the household because dad's not doing it. And the youngest son, his job is to be the funny one that brings lightheartedness to the situation, right? Everyone has their role. Yeah. Well, that's homeostasis. We're not saying that's the way it should be, but that's the way the system works. Yeah. Once mom decides, hey, I'm sick of being part of the system, I'm going to go to Al-Anon or some sort of codependency group where she's getting help there, therapy. And she realizes, I refuse to be codependent anymore and enable my husband's behavior. That screws up the system. It's not a healthy system, but that's their system. Now, all of a sudden, the husband is upset all the time because the wife isn't, calling him sick for work when he's passed out drunk. She's not cleaning up his laundry when he threw up all over. She's not doing his thing. He's upset now. The whole system is out of whack because homeostasis is out of whack, but she's doing the most loving thing for herself, her kids, and her husband, even though it messes stuff up and it looks like she's abandoning her role.
She's the problem. Yeah.
She looks like the problem. She's going to be blamed. She's actually the one who's getting healthy. And I think that's what's happening right now with church issues over the last number of years, where people have been bringing things to light. We've had Scot McKnight on, and there's other people who have had great contributions. They're disrupting homeostasis, and that's okay. They love the church, but they're saying this isn't the way we should be. Let's not enable this anymore.
And it's not good. It's not good. What we're doing. We can go so many directions with this.
So let's look at a spectrum to give people some language. This has been very helpful for me because as I've come out of my own issues over the last number of years, I keep hearing people talk about church hurt. And well, if it's just hurt, you could get over hurt. You get a scratch or a wound, you could heal from that. From acute injuries, you could heal easily. From chronic injuries, you don't heal as easily, though, but we put everything on these acute things. So this is something that I found as helpful, and I'd love to know your thoughts as we work through it. Instead of looking at as just hurt or not hurt, let's look at it as a spectrum and different, almost a call and response. So the first thing we would say is there's the less intense side of the equation. And so we could say that oftentimes in churches, there's offenses that happen. And so this can happen from the church leader or from congregate to congregate, brother to brother, sister to sister,
Mhm.
right? What would be some examples that you guys would see in a congregation of an offense happening towards someone that you've maybe experienced or seen in pastoral ministry?
Well, I know of one. There's a I mean, these are kind of silly. I'm trying to think of something that's more serious, but there's I've seen uh, just offhanded comments.
Mhm.
Um, I've seen pastors in sermons tell a joke, and that
Yep.
joke was in them. I told a joke once years ago at a church in a sermon about a lawyer. And when the service was over, a young lawyer
Mm.
came up to me and said, "I'm kind of tired of everybody telling these lawyer jokes. We're
Oh,
not all like that." And I go, "Okay." And he wasn't mad at me. He just pointed it out. So I said, "Okay, I'll keep that in mind." And we talked about it. I apologized that he what for that. I said, "Yeah, I understand what you're coming from," and we had a little conversation, and we were fine.
mhm.
But in the moment, he was pretty offended by what I said because I made a typical lawyer joke. And that's really low level, but it happened.
Oh, I think that's a great example. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's something that it could be a comment, it could be that would be a pastor comment. It could be something that might happen within congregants. Maybe a remark is made, someone's trying to be funny. Maybe they're having a bad day, maybe they say something, but an offense is usually something that could be repairable. It's not abusive in and of itself. It might be isolated. It's this one-time thing. It could be intentional, like a joke. That's a bad joke. It could be just an accident. We all, especially Rob, you and I, we have ADD. Our filters, sometimes there's holes in the filters. Things slip out. We're not tending to be jerks. Oh, that kind of happens, right?
Yeah.
But usually those offenses can be resolved through repentance. It could be resolved through an apology, through
Yeah.
forgiveness, through repair.
Right.
It's an acute injury that could be healed, right?
Okay.
And that's the way, like, I would describe a lot of what happens in the church. And so even to the point of the video, the outrageous video we watched, yeah, if there's hurt that you've experienced, or if it's a result of an offense, yeah, fix that. Like, repair that. Run to that. Pursue forgiveness. Pursue reconciliation, because that's what Christians are called to do, right? We don't hold grudges. We don't bear grudges.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah.
Now,
Yeah. I'm thinking of an
often,
example, Vinny, just where the
yeah, yeah.
pastor says, "Hey, sorry everyone for the mess. We're in the middle of construction or in the middle of painting or whatever." And dear old Martha worked like 3 hours Sunday morning trying to get the sanctuary ready, knowing that there's a mess. And now I cleaned it up. There's no mess. What are you talking about? Like,
Mm,
oh, sorry about that.
mhm,
Right.
mhm.
And that's where, hey, sorry, Martha, just deal with it. No, you say, I didn't realize. And what you need to do in that moment is say, and thank you, Martha, for making this as presentable as it is. Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
yeah.
That
Mhm.
is alleviating the hurt. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, and so
Yeah.
that's the thing. So there's the offense and then there's the hurt. So I remember I was a part of a really small church. I had served regularly playing drums, and I told the pastor, "Hey, I was going to be leaving the church to go. Nothing wrong with it. I wanted to go to a church closer to my home." And so this one I
Okay.
was commuting like a half an hour. And so I told him, "Hey, in 6 weeks I'm going to be leaving." Well, on my last Sunday, and this is a very small, everyone knows everyone. It's a very informal church. Like, they did nothing to send me
Mm,
off, to pray for me, which he would often do with people.
right.
And I was very offended by that. It's like, bro, I'm literally up here playing drums. I'm serving. And because I did not then do what I should have done, which is gone to him and say, "Hey, I'm just curious. Why didn't you do this for me when I know you do this for everyone else?" I let that fester for years. And that became a church hurt. I was bitter
Mm,
towards this guy. And eventually I went and I talked to him. And I was a little more healthy and more mature myself. But those sorts of things like that, he didn't abuse me. It was just he did something that was hurtful. He had an oversight for whatever reason. A lot of things that happen are like that. They're on that side of the equation. But we shouldn't equate that with what we would call abuse, because abuse is something different, right? And this is
Yeah.
something where we would say abuse is a pattern of something happen. It could be a one-time thing, something just totally egregious. But oftentimes abuse will involve power imbalances, like you had talked about earlier, Rob, you know, a leader to a congregant. Um, it could, we obviously are aware of sexual abuse or physical abuse.
Mhm.
Those are the types of abusive things that are very obvious and easy to note because they're tangible. But there's also psychological abuse. There's
Yeah.
and those are oftentimes more difficult things to see because you can't put your finger on them. Psychological abuse, manipulation, things like that. The term spiritual abuse is used a lot for churches, and usually what that means is it's still abuse, whether it's psychological or physical, but because it's under the umbrella of
Yeah.
someone who's in the position of speaking for God in that
Right.
sense, that makes it spiritual abuse because now the person who is doing the thing is reflecting who God is. And so it's just hard to you're spiritually abusing someone because now the person who is abused has a distorted view of who God is because they're having to always look through that filter of that person who did the abuse.
Yeah.
And abuse then leads to what is known as trauma. And trauma is the lasting psychological or emotional or physiological impression that happens. It's the lasting injury. So we talk about PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, in a soldier. Well, they didn't necessarily experience that when the thing happened. We'll call the abuse happened, the war happened. They experienced that afterwards. And the same thing happens with whether it's physical abuse or spiritual abuse. The trauma is the lasting impression that happens, and that's not just something that you could just get over. That's something that stays with you, and it's deeper. And to minimize that as church hurt, well, that's not doing anyone any justice because now it puts this undue pressure on the person who actually experienced the thing, saying, "Well, why can't you just get over this? Why can't you just make repair on this?" When chances are the other person or the system is pretty dysfunctional, and it won't allow that for that to happen. I don't know. I'm introducing another category now.
Right.
I would love to hear your guys' thoughts on this.
I mentioned earlier, I mean, we offline, I mentioned this whole shift in church culture from pastors being seen as shepherds to the culture that grew up in the 80s and 90s where pastors were seen as CEOs, particularly as churches began to grow. There's a lot of emphasis on leadership, and by leadership, they meant kind of CEO organizational leadership, leading teams, leading people, casting vision, all of which have their own legitimate place. I think the shift from seeing pastor from shepherd to CEO had allowed us to construct systems where the organization began to take precedent, and the goals of the organization began to take precedent over the actual individual lives of people. So the whole idea of, is the church serving the people or the people serve the church, is where I think the shift happens. Now, obviously, this has gone on throughout history because there are a few occupations or places in the culture, in any culture, where people with narcissistic tendencies can gravitate, and being a pastoral leader, a spiritual leader is one of them. And so we get people, you got abusive people throughout church history. So it's not, but we have a unique form of it in our culture, in the current, this last generation, that's emerged out of this sort of corporate view of church, where we have these organizations that have a mission. You got to fulfill the mission, and all of that's, there's legitimacy to all that kind of language. The church is on mission. There's all, but when that becomes the way that we then manipulate or control people or discipline, whatever form that takes, people who don't fit that mold, then you're setting up situations that are ripe. You combine that, what we talked earlier about the isolation of leaders. As the organization grows, the leadership becomes more isolated from the people that in the congregation, and that just creates this dynamic. The power dynamics grow, the success, and I've seen it over and over and over. I've seen it in my own family, where this phrase is thrown out. Got to protect the ministry, and they talk about, they use that language a lot. And I just think we create this a perfect storm where abuse is people are going to get hurt, and abuse is going to take place.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's good. Rob, you got thoughts?
I think here, I know we have to finish up, but I think that means, I think we have to recalibrate what church is, what it means, and how we do church.
I agree.
I know this is a Protestant phenomena, The Orthodox wouldn't say that, but I think we need to recalibrate. Yeah.
You mean when you say it's a prominent Protestant phenomenon, what do you mean by that?
I mean, the megachurch system, we
Okay.
need to reevaluate that, its efficacy, its value. How do we, we've talked before, Vinny, about, the way we do sermons. I don't think it allows us to be prophetic. It allows us to speak into the issues, to speak into the times. We've lost the shepherding heart, the pastoral role of shepherds, and making of disciples. We're trying to make big churches consumers, and numbers matter, and no, transformation of lives matter. Discipleship matters. Christ likeness matters. Redeeming society matters. Bringing just society, doing acts that imitate Christ matters. And I think we've lost that in what Danny's talking about. So
Yeah.
You would say that because we have to merge what both you guys are talking about, the CEO organizational big church model, and Rob, what you're saying, that fosters an environment for more abuse to happen. Not that this can't happen in a single church with 100 people with one pastor. Like the same kind of abuse can happen there.
Yeah.
But it's I don't know, just that bigger church model can foster more of this.
I think it's more endemic to it.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I've seen it in small churches too. I've seen individual pastors be abusive and controlling. So there's no limit to there's the expression of evil and sinfulness and brokenness that happens at all levels in all kinds of situations. I do think the corporate model creates an environment where that can happen very readily.
Yeah.
That's good. As we wrap up, this is what I would love to hear from both you guys, but guys who work as pastors, who have worked with people and encourage them, give a 10-second speech. So I want each of you to do this because I want to hear this from you. Give an exhortation to the church leader in terms of like, hey, watch this as a church leader in terms of you have this position and power, and what does self-reflection look like to you to make sure that you are shepherding your congregation well, and looking at any issues that could be popping up, and then also address the congregant to say, hey, whether it's you're dealing with hurt or abuse, this is a healthy way to pursue reconciliation, healing, whatever that might look like. Like, how would you address those two groups of people? I'm wondering.
Wow. In 10 seconds.
Yeah. Right. Oh, I'm just trying to say, and with brevity, how would you encourage each group of people?
I think the difficulty, Vinny, sorry to jump in, Danny, is the fact that spectrum is so broad.
Okay.
Yeah.
That if someone's listening, if someone says, well, I'm in bucket 2, and Danny and I, or I'm speaking of people on this side of the spectrum, and maybe I think there are some people that have been genuinely hurt deeply by the church, that my answer to that question might not be appropriate to them. So I'm going to hesitate to answer that part if it's okay. But if I'll address the pastor part. Danny, I'll just go first this time if that's okay. And say, in humility, consider others better than yourselves. Your attitude should be the same as that of Christ Jesus. I think the Philippians 2 really applies this. If we start there with the Ephesians 5, imitate Christ as Christ loved the church. I think if we start there, it's gonna help a lot. But that doesn't mean, and again, even saying that, there's pastors that have been deeply wounded as well, and that might not help them, because that simply says, hey, it's all on your, it's like, well, no, you've been deeply hurt too. And so I just want to be careful with that.
What you're saying is pastors can be hurt by the congregation or by the fellow system that they have been in, which is actually, I'll say this before Danny, before you jump in. Rob, how many pastors do you and I know personally? Like, we know a lot of the same people who are amazing pastors who no longer serve in church ministry or even are even like vocationally, or just they can't even be part of a church because they've been deeply hurt. I mean, I would say dozens. I know dozens of people who are amazing pastors. You and I both know who, and then Danny, you probably are same situation.
Let's name them.
Let's name them all. Let's tag them in this Facebook post. But honestly, like, this is almost like at epidemic levels in terms of like church. Do you realize how many pastors it's not merely burnt out, but they've been abused in some kind of way, and they can't do this anymore. This thing they're gifted in and just so good at, so they can't even do it anymore.
I think Rob's hit the nail. It's complex. It's a spectrum, and it's hard to nail it down. One of the things that I tell leaders, particularly younger leaders, that the three things that I encourage all leaders to cultivate are humility, curiosity, and courage. And I think, Rob, you mentioned humility, the Philippians 2. I think it's true. I think curiosity about our becoming self-aware, but also just curiosity, just always being a lifelong learner and being open. I don't have all the answers. My way's not the only way to do things. I want to learn and grow. And then courage. There are times when you have to courageously say, this is the right thing to do. And I can't just be about holding up a system, a bad system. I have to take a risk every now and say, this is what Christ is calling me to do and to be and to say. And that takes a lot of wisdom. I think all of that wisdom is underneath all of that. But so the sad part we come to this end is that both congregants and pastors, we have unhealthy church situations where people are being hurt. We could go on and on and on and on. I do think that we have to begin with ourselves and trying to become healthy people, healthy spiritually. And that's the first step for all of us. And that's it's not a one size fits all. It's not some discipleship program you run people through it and at the other end, they're all going to be healthy. It's a lifelong process of being formed in the image of Christ. And that takes work and humility and other people and community and all those things to accomplish.
Okay, that's good. Let's wrap it up there. Appreciate you guys' wisdom and your time. And if you're listening to this, hopefully this is ministering to you in some way. If you have questions, shoot us a message, whether on email, you could find us on determinedtruth.com, all three of us, or have comments in the YouTube channel. And we'll continue this conversation as we explore this difficult conversation, but we appreciate you guys being with us. We'll see you next week. Thanks for joining us today. If you dug it, please subscribe and share it with others. Check us out at determinedtruth.com to see more of what we do and maybe even consider supporting us. See you next time.
Faith is an ocean you can walk on.